as you sit down and crack a few crabs or maybe catch a fish or two for dinner. Do you ever think about whether it's safe to eat what comes out of our local waterways? Maybe you should. Our area waterways, as beautiful as they are troubled.
During the 60s, the river was in really bad shape. It was polluted. Raw sewage, chemicals being dumped into the river, to the extent that President Johnson called the river a national disgrace and pushed forward some clean water legislation which prevented dumping and putting things into the water that shouldn't be here. But until that legislation got things turned around, there were signs down here that said you couldn't swim, you couldn't go near the water, there were dead fish everywhere.
While the waterways aren't that bad now, what happened back then left its mark.
PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, are a whole suite of chemicals and compounds that exist. They have been around since probably the turn of the century. PCBs have not been manufactured in the United States since mid-1970s. They are a legacy. They're a problem that's in the river. They're a problem that's in the sediments of the river. They're a problem that's on the land surfaces in various places.
Those PCBs may cause cancer. Maryland, D.C., and Virginia all have fish advisories posted for certain tributaries and parts of the bay.
These chemical contaminants, PCBs, mercury, are things that will bioaccumulate in the fish. So what you want to avoid is taking and eating these fish in any significant numbers.
What about those blooms of algae that kill bay life? Are they causing problems for our food?
You know, one of the things that people are concerned about when they hear about these things, like harmful algal blooms and others, is that, oh my word, this is a toxin that's going to be up the food chain and affect the fish, the health of the fish that we eat. Most of these things, almost all of the ones that we are exposed to, don't have that risk. There are some other algae that do cause those problems down in the tropical areas. So if you were in the Florida Keys, there's some things to worry about. But here, generally, no. If you treat your fish or seafood properly, don't let it spoil, cook it appropriately, there are no risks related to that.
What about the water that comes out of your tap? Much of it's from the Potomac River. How safe is it? Could other problems in the waterways affect the region's drinking water?
But we now have a new generation of different types of chemical concerns and contaminants. One of them, for example, is things that we use as flame retardants on fabrics. That gets in the environment, and it lingers for a long time and has some effects. But this additional emerging concern is that some of these chemical contaminants, like these flame retardants and other organic materials, organic compounds, but also things that we use for human health and human well-being, things like pharmaceutical products such as hormones, birth control pills, other kinds of medicine we take that affect our hormone. We, of course, excrete those, and those goes into the waste streams and into the environments. Another is antibiotics. We use very large quantities of antibiotics, not only in terms of for human sanitation, but also for animal production. So chickens are fed large quantities of antibiotics to reduce disease and so on. So all this ends up into the environment and has unintended consequences.
We are trying to remove things that are potentially pathogens. There is no indication that the pharmaceuticals or the endocrine disrupting compounds at the levels they have been detected are of immediate concern. There have been pharmaceuticals in the water for as long as people have been taking pills because they would naturally be excreted. The best thing we can do, and the easiest thing we can do, is to keep the pharmaceuticals out of the water. We can do that in a couple ways. We can, as individuals, not take any unused prescriptions and flush them down the toilets, because the wastewater plants are not specifically designed to remove all of those compounds. They do a great job removing the solids and cleaning up the water before it goes back to the river, but we are not, their processes don't anticipate those particular pharmaceuticals. So that's one way to do it. The other thing is we look at cattle feeding operations or other poultry operations where the runoff from those consolidated feeding operations might get into the river, where they're using certain hormones and various things to promote the growth or just certain food products that the animals eat.
Before drinking water reaches your tap, it goes through an extensive filtration process.
This water is going through a coagulation and sedimentation process. We've added a chemical, aluminum sulfate, to force the little dirt particles to settle out of the water. It will then go from here to the filters, and then from the filters to the disinfection process. And then we add further disinfectant to have a barrier to reinfection of the water if something were to happen in the distribution system.
One of those pathogens that's showing up in low numbers is Cryptosporidium, a parasite that gives you the runs and can be deadly. As part of $90 million in upgrades at the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission's Potomac plant, Crypto's being targeted using ultraviolet light.
The UV reactor system, which is actually two systems, one on each side of the plant. We have the west plant and the east plant. Together will be will actually be the largest UV system in the world when it goes online in 2010. The system will be able to treat up to 300 million gallons of water, which makes it a huge system. UV is very effective in deactivating Cryptosporidium. It does things to the DNA that prevents replication. So if it can't replicate, it can't infect a host.
The bottom line on all of the region's water systems?
The water is safe to drink. We are regulated by very strict standards through EPA, which are based on public health standards and public health requirements.
When we say the water's safe, it's safe, but very special needs individuals may need to talk to their doctors.
Colleen Kelleher, WTOPnews.com.